We have heard people talk about trying to define what the ultimate truth is. And so that's kind of a discussion topic that I thought would be quite interesting because so many people have different points of view. So it's kind of like a rainbow, as I've described before, in that other than your own perspective, there's no such thing as a rainbow. Because when you take all perspectives of 360 degrees, a mile around the rainbow in all directions, top, bottom, and everywhere, and you combine them all together, there's no such thing as a rainbow. It doesn't exist. It's only in your own single point of view that the rainbow exists. Truth is the same way. And I know that so many people would like to argue with me about that and say, no, there's an ultimate truth. But there isn't. It's only your point of view. Now, we could say there's such a thing as good and bad, evil, not evil, etc., etc. And we could say, well, there's ultimate truths about that. Well, that's certainly true from a standpoint of the single point of view of God. God has a single point of view of what is the ultimate truth, or good or bad or evil. But that's a single point of view also. And as if you were to align yourself completely and utterly perfect with God, then your point of view would be the same. But it's still it's still a point of view. And everyone has a different point of view of the same thing. Let's take geometry, for instance. You could have a square, and you could say, well, that's a square. But if you drew it out on paper and then turned it this direction, to you, it would look like a single straight line. So your point of view is it's a single straight line. My point of view is that it's a square. And then if somebody else was looking from a different angle, the square would actually be a pyramid, for instance, and it would go out like that. But from my perspective, I don't see the pyramid. From their perspective, they see a pyramid, they don't see a single line. So something as minor as just a single line to you looks like a square to me and a pyramid to someone else, and someone from a different dimension might see it as a tesseract. So that's one way of trying to make it easy to understand how many different points of view of the same thing. The reality is there is no such thing as a thing. It is all an interpretation, because from an enlightened point of view, and I'm not necessarily talking about myself, I'm just talking about enlightenment. From an enlightened point of view of reality, reality is an illusion. It is an illusion created from the perspective of God and created into existence, and we coexist within this dream reality that God created. So the dream is the perspective of God. And we interpret what that is with our limited abilities. Let's go a different direction. I've heard it said by some spiritual people trying to define what the ultimate reality is, and they boiled it down to awareness. So each individual has an awareness of I am. And it doesn't change. Each person's opinion is the same. And they say, well, I am is the observer of the I am. It is observing reality. It is an awareness that you exist. And that doesn't change no matter if it's a cat or a dog. If a dog could be aware of itself, it would have the same awareness level, that I am. I am a dog, I am this, or I am that. But whatever it is the I am is assuming, it's the same. So there's an existent awareness. But everyone's is a different perspective of somebody else's I am. And at this point in our existence, we don't know what another person's I am is. We don't even know what the perspective of God's I am is. So in this particular reality that we are existing, it is our experience in this reality to try the best we can to understand what reality is from our single perspective. And what it all boils down to is there's only one, golly, I don't even know what to call it. There's one perspective that is universal among all perspectives that allows the ability to kind of relate, and that is love. So you can kind of relate to God through the perspective of love. You can kind of relate to the perspective of any individual through the medium of love. Because what love does is it allows a type of trust, and I'm talking about real love. It allows a kind of trust that does not condemn a person for having a different perspective, point of view than your own. So that's why people that lack love, be it sociopaths and psychopaths and people that are self-centered, that do not really possess or have not cultivated the aspect of love, they're not able to relate to other individuals. And so they don't have that trust. And so that's where hatred comes in, that's where violence comes in, that's where wars come in, that's where all kinds of conflict comes in, because there's no trust between the individuals, because they're not able to have trust, because they have no love. So if this is what Jesus promoted, in Hindu philosophy, they reduced or combined all teachings of all the Vedas into a single word called Advaita. And if you were to condense all the teachings of Jesus, it would be love. And if you take Advaita and love, now you're starting to get somewhere. Anyways, my getting back to love, that is a way of realizing your point of view is different than someone else's. Now, I've said before, you can teach about lemons till the cows come home, but in reality, unless you taste the lemon, you're not going to know. So likewise, unless you, so to say, walk in another person's shoes, you're not going to know what it's like to be them. Well, the thing is you can't walk in their shoes. It isn't possible to see reality from their perspective. It isn't possible. But you can have love for that person, and as such, trust that person. So when they have a difference from you or a different point of view, or they disagree with you, through love, you realize, oh, they see different than I do the exact same thing. We're both looking at the same thing. We're both looking at the same problem. We're coming up with different solutions to the same problem. We disagree with each other. But with love, you can go, well, they're not my enemy. They don't hate me. So they see something different than I do. And so that's how you negotiate, and you try to understand each other, and you try to get along with each other. You're never, ever, ever going to perfectly see the same thing the same way as another individual, because every individual is a I am. You have this I am and you have this I am. And until you are one with God, your I ams are going to perceive reality differently. But when you combine love with the I ams, then you start actually building. And this particular I am is maybe held in this stasis, if you will. They can't transcend. They can't go any higher. This is true with spirituality, incredibly true. This is why you get people in different churches that will never transcend the understanding of the dogma in that particular religion or faith or belief system, because it's like a herd mentality or whatever. And so they all have this same thing. And then, and of course they fear. For instance, like you got a religion and they go, well, we're the only right way. We don't want to listen to the Hindus over here. And the Hindus don't want to go to church with the Mormons over here. And the Catholics don't want to do this with the Baptists. But when you have love for one another, and like I say, when you have love, you have to realize there are individuals in this reality that do not have love and quite possibly are never going to have love, because it's my opinion that not 30%, but actually 60 or 66% of all I ams followed Lucifer as a guide, if you will, to become one with God. And as from a Christian standpoint, you darn well know that people that follow Lucifer are not going to become one with God, because that's not the right path to becoming one with God. Rules, regulations, self-absorbed study and understanding is the Luciferian way. And that's a good way for learning how to manipulate, handle, and get along in this world for survival. Yes, that's a very good way. And it has to be, because Lucifer is the god of this world. But likewise, you have to incorporate that understanding. You don't necessarily have to be that, but at least understand and incorporate that understanding, so that in fact you can survive to an age of retirement, so that at least you can understand. And then incorporate the concept of spirituality from the 33% that followed Jesus, if you will, to become one with God or to understand the path to God. And if you combine love, then like I said, people are held in this stasis with the dogma of their particular faith and religion. But when they get rid of all their fears and all their anxieties and everything, and then listen to someone from a Hindu perspective, and I'm not saying a Buddhist perspective, I'm saying Hindu. Sanatana Dharma is one, or whatever. And they have a different perspective that can actually get the Christian out of their dogmatic stasis and raise to a higher level. But they don't do that because they fear. But if they loved this person without fear and had love for God, because if you have love for God, then you don't fear doing anything to better yourself spiritually, because you don't care if you're going to go to hell. Because if you love God, then you got to know that if you go to hell, that's what God wants for you. And why would you not want what God wants for you? And if God wants you to go to hell, you better damn well be happy about that and enjoy eternity in hell. Because if you don't, there's something wrong with you. Do you understand that? Because now you have a love for God. When you have a love for God, you trust God. And if you think God's going to send you to hell, well, you're going to be happy about that. Because if you don't want to go to hell, you want something different than God does. And now you're in disagreement with God, which is essentially what Lucifer is. Lucifer did not trust God and said, whoa, 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 this isn't going to work for me. I don't think that I should be weak and this and that. Because Lucifer saw Jesus as being weak. And Jesus saw Lucifer as being hard-hearted. So they have a difference of opinion. They have a different perspective of reality. And of course, Lucifer, not having love, did not listen to Jesus, for instance, to see the perspective of what Jesus understood as being real. Jesus understood the perspective of Lucifer, but Lucifer did not understand the perspective of Jesus. And why? Because Jesus had love. Jesus loved Lucifer, didn't fear Lucifer in the least degree, because he had love for God, and he had love for Lucifer. So he didn't fear, he understood Lucifer, but Lucifer didn't have love, therefore he didn't understand Jesus, and he had fear of trying to understand Jesus, and instead stuck to his guns with having dependence entirely upon your own self. But if you have a dependence upon your own self, you're never going to transcend the I am of what you are. When I say transcend, of course you can't transcend the essence of what you are, but what I mean is transcend ignorance. Because the I am of what you are, well, we know in my last video I said you're going to be what you're going to be regardless. But some point along the path, you have to understand, you have to have love for one another. Love will convert enlightenment. Let's say you become spiritually enlightened like the Buddha. You can do that without love. But once you have that perspective of enlightenment, you're stuck again. And it's not going to do you any good until you have love for one another. And then you take your perspective of enlightenment and go, wow, I'm the most enlightened. I'm spiritually enlightened. I know this and that and everything else. And I've experienced it. But when you have love for one another, you realize, oh, that's my perspective. My perspective is enlightened. It is like Buddha. It knows the truth of all things. But it's still stuck in that perspective until it surrenders that through love and realizes another individual that is not spiritually enlightened can teach that person something that they don't know, and that they're going to actually need to know if they're ever going to become one with God, to transcend this everything, if you will. So, what is ultimate truth? There's no such thing as ultimate truth. The ultimate truth is that there's no such thing as ultimate truth. You, the essence of I am, interprets what truth is. And there's no possibility of it interpreting truth as God presents truth. There's no way. Unless you are God, and there is no such thing as you are God, but God is the only personage that everything God does is truth. If God were to say, or if God were to present something that appears to be evil, it doesn't matter what you think. God is truth. So anything God does, thinks, or presents, by the mere fact that it's coming from God, it's true. And unless you're in alignment with that, you're out of sync. You don't understand what truth is. And the only way to understand what truth is if you incorporate love. You cannot use knowledge, you cannot use experience, you cannot use enlightenment, you cannot use a knowledge of 100% of all things. No, you can't. That will not get you to be in alignment with God and to see the same things that God does. The only way to do that is love. Because when you go from a higher perspective each time with love, eventually you'll get to Jesus, for instance, and Jesus will teach you what he knows with love. And then it goes in this way, this way, this way. Eventually you get up to God and you trust God, and then you're able to see as God. That's the meaning of being one with God. But there's only one way to get there, and that is through the medium of love. Because love throws away your own fears and everything so that you have trust. You have trust in an individual and zero fear. That's how you learn what the Luciferians teach. I'm not suggesting you do that, but I'm saying if a Christian wants to know the perspective of what Luciferians think and what they believe in, then you would have trust to them because you love them. It's not going to change whether or not they are evil. It's not going to change whether or not they go to hell. It isn't going to change anything in them unless they have love for you. But if you have love for them, you don't fear them. Why would you fear them? You're an eternal being. You're not a perspective that is living in a body that when it dies, it's dead and it's gone forever. You're eternal. Who cares what happens in this life if for some reason you have love in you and you want to understand the perspective of a Luciferian and you get killed? Oh well. So what? You get born again. You're an eternal being. You fear. That's what keeps you from doing that. Now, I'm not suggesting you put yourself in a dangerous position because that's not very smart either. You have to use your God-given wisdom and intelligence and your self-preservation and temper that with love. That's what I'm saying. It's very complex, but also very not complex. Anyways, I hope you enjoy this, and I got a lot of projects to do today. Artwork. I'm starting to work on a metal hydraulic press that I'm building. I'm cutting, TIG welding, etc. And I'm going to use it because I do these intricate cutouts in my wood projects. They're about 1/4 inch thick, and they're so intricate I cannot get the inlays into the other wood. I used sledgehammers before, and I'm going to use a 30-ton press to press them. I'll show you some of my artwork in my next some of my next videos. Anyways, thank you very much for watching, and I do really hope you have a good day. Bye.